Hey, Dr. C here. Glad you could make it today. Today we're going to talk about, again, the vital signs that we take in a doctor's office or in a hospital. They are the data that are important for your health. A lot of these things you can do at home, on your own, with the right instrument. And so that's why I'm here, to tell you which things are valuable that you should have as part of taking care of yourself, part of your first aid, part of maintaining your own wellness. Remember, healthcare system going down the tubes, you have to do your own on this. So let's talk today about temperature and breathing rate. Those are the two topics today. Last time we did blood pressure and pulse. This time we're going on. So first, let's talk about temperature. First of all, what is a normal temperature? What is the normal temperature in a human? Well, this was established actually way back in 1851, when a German physician did 25,000 axillary temperatures, 25,000 people, all ages, and established the norm, which then was 98.6 Fahrenheit, 98.6 or 37 centigrade. Of course, he defined it as a centigrade. We're the only country that uses Fahrenheit, but for us, 98.6. Well, that was axillary temperature, remember. And skin temperature is a little less than oral temperature, which is a little less than rectal temperature. You can get it in any of these, all different ways of measuring temperature. The closest to the inside of your body temperature, called a core temperature, is the rectal temperature. Okay, with that as a background, let's talk a little bit about it. Temperature is regulated in a human. It's regulated by a little center in the hypothalamus. You've heard about that hypothalamus. It seems that there's loads of things that go on in that hypothalamus. But you need more than the hypothalamus. But at any rate, the regulatory mechanism in the brain is located in that hypothalamus. And it's regulated within certain bounds. Make sure it doesn't go too high, make sure it doesn't go too low. So let's say that you're in the cold. You're exposed in the cold. What do? Message then goes from the external cold up to the brain, to the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus says, okay, we're going to start with some shivering, muscle activity, which does generate some heat. That muscle activity generates heat. And also shrink down some of those blood vessels so that you don't have to worry about losing any more heat. So that's what the hypothalamus does if it goes too low. If it goes too high, well, just the opposite then. They shut it down as well. They sweat, and that sweat evaporates, and you lose some of the heat with that evaporation. Of course, if it's very humid, on top of that heat, like it does around here every now and then, it gets damn humid. That reduces the ability to lose heat by sweat. Not that you still sweat. May even sweat more, but you're not losing the heat, unfortunately, that way. It also increases the blood flow to the skin so that you lose a little bit of the heat because the blood vessels are open and it loses a little bit of the heat as well. You also get thirsty, so you have to drink more water, not more alcohol, more water. That's basically it. And so those are the things that happen when you get the brain controlling the two ends of the temperature. So let's talk a little bit about what happens now when you go too high. What happens with a fever? In fact, what is a fever? A fever would be over 100.4. That's over that temperature, 100.4 Fahrenheit. That'll be a fever. How do you get a fever? What the heck causes a fever? And the fever can be a low-grade fever, like just a barely 100.4, or it could be a moderate fever, up to 103, or a high fever, 104. You definitely don't want to go too much higher than that. And why do you get the fever? You get it because of what they call pyrogens. A lot of these cytokines that can cause heat. And you can get these pyrogens, and they cause directly an increase in the metabolism, and that causes an increase in the temperature. You also can get a little fever when you have injured cells. Like, for example, you get a heart attack. You're losing a certain number of muscle cells in the heart. That causes a fever as well. You also may get it with, say, a pulmonary embolism. When a clot goes to the lungs, you lose a little piece of the lung. That's dead tissue. That will cause a pyrogen and will cause a temperature as well. Now, you may also get a head injury, and that happens to involve the hypothalamus. If that happens, it can affect that center, that heat center as well. These temperatures, those fevers, they can be of varying types. You can get an intermittent temperature. In other words, it goes up and then comes back down. Intermittent temperature. You may also get a remittent temperature. May go for a while and then come back. Go for a while, come back. Or it may be continuous, a continuous temperature. Now, the continuous temperatures are usually drug-related, excessive drug. That's usually the cause. And then finally, you may even get a relapsing temperature. May go for a period of time, then bang, relapses. Go for a period of time, relapses. So that's a relapsing temperature as well. Usually goes through certain stages. You may get a little prodrome, a little warning that it's coming on. And that is usually very short. Usually you get an ache, pain, feeling fatigued, that type of thing. May get a headache. That's all telling you, uh-oh, something's brewing inside there. Then you get a chill. That's usually the products of the bacteria that are being broken down by your natural immune system. Remember the white blood cells, those white cell corpuscles, they come in and attack the bacteria that may be causing an infection, and as it destroys some of those cells, it causes a temperature. So you get the chills, though, when it's actually physically breaking down those bacteria. Then you get your fever itself. You may get really flushed. You may even get a little confused if the fever goes up to 103, 104. Usually the skin is very warm at that time, very pinkish in color. And then finally, the last phase is defervescence, a slow back to normal from a fever. So, how do we check a fever? How can we check it? Well, you remember back in the old days, I can remember back in the old days, what they did is they used the back of their hand. Put the back of the hand onto the forehead. How accurate is that? Pretty damn accurate, about 52, 53, up to 58% accuracy. That's not bad. Not bad, considering the fact that you're doing it with the back of your hand. So that's one way of checking it. Then we had the onset of the thermometer. We had the Mercury Thermometer. We used a lot of mercury back then, not just in thermometers, but also in taking blood pressures and all too. It was good. I used to play with the damn mercury, a lot of fun with that. But the thermometers early on, once mercury had a bad name to it, they then just used colored water, usually red water. And so it depended on expansion of the water or expansion of the mercury, and it would go up into that little column that goes up the tube. So they calibrated those, and they were on the market. There were two types. One was oral, which had a long reservoir for the mercury, and then the rectal, which had a short. So you made sure that you took the right one. Remember, they were both in that alcohol, the little container that held those things. Make sure if you're going to take it in the mouth, make sure that you took the long one, because otherwise it would be a little tasty, So, well, at any rate, we use the mercury thermometer a lot. After that, what came on the market were these things. First of all, they had an ear thermometer. They used this mainly for the kids because it was not easy to take an oral on an infant, for example, so you usually took a rectal or an axillary. So we used the ear. And what you did is you just inserted that into the ear canal, and it took the reading off of that tympanic membrane, that eardrum. That's where it got its reading. And it used as a basis for that infrared. So that was the ear. When we got into the more sophisticated things, and this is what they used basically, especially during the COVID time now, and we still are in that damn COVID time, they used the infrared. Now, we all give off infrared rays. We all do. And what happens is that you can concentrate that infrared that's given off. You put this near the skin, press the handle, and you can get a reading. It takes those infrared rays, and using the electrical circuits in here, there's a little thermopile that creates electrical energy. The electrical energy then gets converted to a temperature. And so you can get an actual readout of the temperature simply by using this, pressing the gauge up against, usually I like to use the inside of the eye. That's a good, not the eye itself, but the skin, and get a reading. Usually takes just a few seconds and you can get a reading. Also, mine is 97.6 right now. You can also get a general reading. This is what they use, for example, in the subway tunnels and buildings, etc. They have a machine up there so they can scan a whole number of people using that infrared technology. They can scan a whole number of people quickly and get the people who have a high temperature over 100.4. So, but that's what they do now. That's how we check it out. Also, this time of year, there are some heat-related problems that can happen. Number one, if you get a little too warm, you can get a heat rash. And that's usually due to blocked sweat glands. And a lot of people get heat rash, so they try to avoid the heat or use a covering over your skin. And you can get a sunburn. You can get a sunburn too. So not just the heat rash itself, but you can actually get some burning of the skin. And it may be just a first-degree burn, just some redness. Maybe a second-degree burn where you get little blisters. Rarely will you get a third-degree burn from the sun. Usually you have to have something hotter than that to get a third-degree, full-thickness type of burn. So basically, that's just the heat rash, the early phases. You can also get heat syncope. You can pass out from the heat. That's usually because of a combination of the heat and dehydration. Heat syncope. You can get heat cramps. You can sweat so much that you wind up getting involuntary muscle cramps. That's the next phase of heat. You can also have heat exhaustion as well, where you get excessive loss of water and salt. So you get very fatigued, you're pale, you may get a little woozy, a little dizzy, lightheaded, you may get your muscle cramps and excessive sweating. All that is part of heat exhaustion. And then the worst would be a heat stroke, where that's a real emergency, where your temperature actually goes to 40 degrees centigrade. That's 104 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a dangerous situation. Usually you're very confused. You may even get seizures, and people have even lost consciousness in those situations. Who is at risk to get these types of things in the sun? Obviously, the infants are very much at risk, all the way up to age 4. People who are over 65, you are at risk. People who are overweight, you are at risk. People who have dementia may not even realize that they're having this problem. So those are all things related to temperature. Okay, let's go on. We talked about temperature long enough, I think. Let's talk a little bit about I didn't talk about hypothermia. I'm telling you, I'm losing it. We talked about too high. What about too low temperature? Well, if you go below too low temperature, what are the reasons for that? And how do you measure that? Well, we usually try to measure the core temperature. If somebody's out in the cold too long, we measure rectal temperature. That's the easiest and quickest way to do it. There's new technology out there that they use at the hospitals and all, but a simple rectal temperature will give you an idea of what the internal temperature is in the body. And if it is below 95 Fahrenheit, 95, you have a mild degree hypothermia. If it goes between 82 and 90, you have a moderate hypothermia. Anything less than 82 degrees Fahrenheit is severe hypothermia. And as I said at the beginning, what does that natural temperature gauge in that hypothalamus do? What that does is it causes some shivering, it causes shallow breathing. You may, in the later phases, get to the point of confusion, drowsiness, etc. So that is hypothermia. What do we do with hypothermia? We warm people up. Warm them up slowly, not fast. Don't put them in a hot bath or something. Just clothing. Get anything wet off of them. And then warm clothing. You may even, if you get them to a hospital setting, you may even then use some warm stuff, warm blankets, etc. on them. And if they really have severe hypothermia and no pulse, and sometimes you can't feel a pulse, very thready, you can't feel the damn thing. Sometimes we've even had people who have been pronounced dead with hypothermia. Once they got warmed up, they wake up, usually in the funeral home. Yeah, that happens. Once a year or so, you'll see the funeral director surprised, corpse woke up. Yeah, but that's because the hypothermia slowed everything down. Okay, that is temperature. Let's talk a little bit about the breathing rate now. Now, the breathing rate is a simple measurement. You just see how many times people are breathing per minute. Yeah, very simple. The average in the adult is between 12 and 20 breaths per minute. That's the average. I know it's a big range, but 12 to 20, because it varies. it varies during the course of the day depending on what you're doing. If you're exercising, for God's sakes, your pulse is going to be up. If you're sedentary, sitting on your butt like I am here, yeah, it'll go down. But nevertheless, that respiratory rate in the adult is between 12 and 20. Now in a child, in an infant, it's over 40. That's in an infant. As they get older, respiratory rate begins to come down a little bit more, down a little bit more. And so that's basically the rate. Now, what determines the rate of breathing in a human? Well, the center for that is in the top of the spinal cord. It's called the medulla oblongata, the medulla. And there's a little center in there that handles the breathing. And that center will get signals from the rest of the body, especially signals if the breathing apparatus in the body is slowed down too much. Oxygen levels begin going down. That center then kicks it up a bit, kicks it up a few notches. And just the opposite, if you breathe too fast, you're breathing off too much carbon dioxide, then there's a chemical sensor that's in the carotid arteries, right here in the neck. And that chemical sensor will notice you got too much. That pH level is going down, or pH level is going up if you're not breathing enough. You're retaining carbon dioxide. So that pH, that's a chemical sensor. That sensor then sends signals to the medulla. Medulla tries, at least, to regulate that, if they can. So what are the causes then of breathing too fast and breathing too shallow? Well, first of all, as I said, it could be normal. If you're doing exercise or doing something or you're under stress, you notice that you're breathing faster as well. It can be under the influence of medication too. Medication can slow down your breathing. Anxiety is a big driver of respiratory rate. I know even our dog, for God's sakes, she gets anxious frequently, and all of a sudden, she's breathing fast, for God's sakes. So I know that hers is anxiety, but that is a major cause. Fever will cause you to breathe faster too, because remember, breathing faster in an animal will help to regulate temperature too. I'll bring that down a little bit. Different illnesses will cause breathing fast, especially, for example, asthma. Asthma does that. Pneumonia, if you've got a significant portion of the lung, so that's not able to give you the oxygen and to take away the carbon dioxide. Carbon monoxide is another reason too. I need to tell you a little bit about now that we're dealing with carbon monoxide we should talk just for a brief moment on that pulse oximeter. Now that pulse oximeter was partially developed right here in Worcester, actually, at WPI. And that pulse oximeter depends upon one thing. Depends upon the hemoglobin in your body. Now the hemoglobin in your body, that is the way that the red blood cells will carry oxygen. Every hemoglobin molecule will carry 4 units of oxygen. 1, 2, 3, 4, A's and B's. And if you have carbon monoxide in the air, that takes priority over oxygen. And it can take up those spaces on the hemoglobin. So you no longer are going to be able to get a good oxygen level because the darn carbon monoxide is taking up the space on the hemoglobin. Now there's 2 types of hemoglobin. Number 1, oxygenated hemoglobin that's coming from the heart and the lungs, and deoxygenated. It's already gone through the tissues, It's in the veins now, and it's coming back to the heart because it's lost its oxygen, most of the oxygen, and now it's coming back to get rejuvenated, you might say, with some new oxygen. So you have both. You have oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood. Incidentally, my oxygen saturation right now is 98%. Not bad for an old fart, not too bad at all. But what this does, it transmits two lights. There's two lights. One is an infrared signal. The other is a red signal. Now, they both have different wavelengths. The infrared has a much higher wavelength than the red, than the regular wavelength. The oxygenated blood, the stuff that's in the artery coming from the lungs, the oxygenated blood is able to identify the red blood, the red cells, or the red light. The deoxygenated, on the other hand, the ultra. And so when you have the two, there's a little mechanism in here that will analyze how much is oxygenated, how much is deoxygenated, and will convert that to a percentage of oxygen. And so when I say I have 98% of the blood that's in there is oxygenated blood. It's good. That's a good reading. Actually, anything over 90 is a decent reading. If you go to 90 or below, that's not a good reading. And so pulse oximetry is really a standard now. It's a very, very good instrument to have at home. And nowadays, it's a lot less expensive than it was back when it first came out. Came out a long time ago. And it was probably in the range of 80 to 90 bucks to buy one of these things. Now you can get one at the drugstore or at Walmart. You can get it now for 29, 30 bucks. Get a decent pulse ox. That's something you should have at home as well. And so, let me tell you then finally, to conclude, all the things that you should have at home as part of your own armamentarium. Pulse oximeter, number one. Number two, temperature. Very inexpensive to get one of these handheld temperature gauges. This one here up against the skin is much better than the one that goes in the ear for the children. Okay, that's another thing you need. When we needed the blood pressure cuff, I had mentioned that there's two that you can buy. One is made by Omron. The Omron is probably the best for the money. Get the Omron. And if you do want to spend some money to get your pulse done, you can get like an EKG, a single lead EKG. Just put your fingers down on that, and you can get a single lead EKG. Or you can get the fancy model, an extra 50, 60 bucks, actually 70 bucks, and they can give you a 6-lead EKG as well. That extra lead goes on to the left leg, or if you want a different reading, you can put it on the right leg. And you could put your fingers down onto that cardiomobile, it's called. If you're interested in getting that, that would be the fourth thing to get. Okay, this is Dr. C. I hope you've had a decent day. Enjoy the weather. We will see you again in the future. Bye-bye.